My name is Chris Aviles. I am a product evangelist for Gameplan. Gameplan is a company that I fell in love with because I've actually been a teacher in New Jersey for about 17 years. And going back to the very beginning of my teaching career, video games and game-based learning has always been something I'm really passionate about. A lot of times my connections with my students was around gaming, letting them know what I was playing. They were telling me what they were playing. And it was only a matter of time before I eventually introduced games into my classroom. So for the better part of 17 years, I have been using games in a variety of different forms to teach and instruct and engage kids. And so when I got the opportunity to join the Gameplan team, I definitely jumped all over it because it is a company full of people like myself who see the value in games and see the opportunities that it presents to drive engagement and instruction. So it's been an absolute dream and pleasure joining the Gameplan team this year. So excited to also begin working on our webinars and professional development series. I'm excited to bring, my background as a teacher, my background in esports and gaming and game-based learning and gamification to Gameplan to help teach others and help teach teachers how to use it with their kids. So you can find me on all the socials at Teched Up Teacher. Afterwards, if you want to get in touch with me, chris@gameplan.com, and excited to dive into 5 best practices in game-based learning. And so number one, I would tell you one of the most important things to understand about game-based learning is just how you can define it, right? It means a lot of different things to a lot of people. And so the easiest way to think about game-based learning is it's using games to teach specific learning objectives or to show, what they've learned. And this idea that students can, be taught something specific or they can show what they learned through video games, I think is really exciting, right? Because games can be a vehicle for engagement. They can be a vehicle for learning. They can be a vehicle for social and emotional growth for students. Games can be a lot of different things. There's a lot of right ways to do this. But I would argue when it comes to game-based learning, there's maybe 1 or 2 ways to, not do this so well. And one thing that I always have to encourage teachers to understand is you don't want to use games and playing the game as a reward. And as we dive deeper, you'll kind of get a better idea why. But it's this idea that using games as a reward, as the carrot to finish their work, if you will, it's not super effective. It's almost like a homework pass, where if you give out homework passes, you're basically saying that the work that you assign doesn't really have any value because here's a pass that says you don't have to do it, right? It's this idea that having kids play as a reward is really just going to get them to rush through their work, probably with little to no improvement in the quality of their work, but definitely through the speed with which they turn their work in. So as we start to think about game-based learning, right, understand that it is a teaching tool, right? And it is going to give teachers the ability to teach specific learning objectives to students, right? Or to empower students to show what they've learned. And both of those ways and all of the things that we're going to talk about today is really, right, the process of using games as a vehicle to drive engagement and learning. And so starting with the definition and understanding what it is, I always think is a great place to start. And part of it too is understanding, right, that games can be a great teacher. So when we talk about understanding game-based learning, this is also part of it. And I'll switch to a little bit more of a close-up of this graphic, but this should look familiar to almost everybody, I would imagine. This is World 1, Level 1 of Super Mario laid out, as the side-scrolling level that it is. And there has been quite a bit written about this level. And what the exciting part of this level is it's really just a great example of how good games can be at teaching, right? When we think about what a video game is and how video games, definitely start, it's understanding that games, right, can be a great teacher. And so, right, think back to when you played the first level of Super Mario for the first time, right? If you guys know that when you start that level, if you don't move, nothing happens. And very quickly, as you slowly advance, you see the timer up at the top, you see the first box that has the coin, you see the mushroom box there, and some of the other boxes. And really it's this understanding that if you don't move, the game doesn't continue. Once it does continue, you're faced with your first enemy, your first Goomba right there in the very beginning, your first mushroom, your power up right there. Some of the boxes contain coins, some of the boxes contain mushrooms, but ultimately, unless you engage, nothing really happens. And then as you look through the level, you'll see that there's also warp pipes, right? 1, 2, and 3 of our differing heights, right? And really this level acts as a tutorial. So it teaches you have to move forward to get the game. Some boxes contain coins, some boxes contain power-ups, right? When you run into your first enemy, you can jump over it or you can jump on it. And then also teaching them the idea that how high Mario jumps, right, really comes down to how hard you push that A button on the Nintendo controller. And that's why, right, you have these different sized warp pipes, is to teach you that you can jump higher or lower by how hard you push down the button. And then from there, you're faced with your first pit. You're faced with a couple of different obstacles, right? 2 enemies at the same time, things to jump over and all that good stuff. But it's really understanding this level is so famous beyond, Super Mario being groundbreaking. It's also a really good teacher. It lets you know from the beginning all the things that you need to, right, to be able to play the game. And so what we can do is we can continue, right, to draw on this idea that games can be a great teacher, right, when it comes to how we use it in the classroom. And so tip 2, right, beyond understanding game-based learning and how games can be a great teacher, before you introduce the gaming, before you get to the gaming with your students, I have always found value in creating a team charter, right, a class charter, whatever the case may be. And that's really important before you introduce video games, because what you want your students to understand is the way you play games at home is not how we learn with games in school. And that's a phrase that I have crafted over the better part of 10, 12 years of doing this, right? The way that they play games at home is not the way that we learn with games in school. And to me, that always started with setting the expectations around how we approach the game and then how we treat each other. And one of those charters that I really have always enjoyed was that Good Luck, Have Fun pledge, a wonderful nonprofit who is out there trying to make sure that regardless of shape, size, color, gender, background, disability, beliefs, that everybody is welcome and accepted, right, in a classroom. And when you think about just the broad scope of people who play video games, having rules around how you're going to not just treat each other while you play games, but also how you're going to treat the games themselves, right? Because we want to make sure they understand, hey, the way you play games at home is not the way we're going to learn with them in school. And if you're going to try to do that, right, you're probably not going to be able to be involved in what we're doing here in the classroom. So my second tip for you as you guys get into game-based learning is set up some classroom norms, classroom rules, not just about how we treat each other, right? So if you're going to use gaming competition and esports to engage kids, you don't want it to turn into a shouting match. You don't want the kids yelling at each other and who's better and who stinks and all that good stuff, right? Set some ground rules, right, about making sure they have positive, set a positive example with their behavior, right? They honor the rules that you set forward. Now, another tip when it comes to creating that charter, right, before you launch the video games in your class, is make sure you give kids a voice, right? So anytime I started any game-based learning, I first came up with the team charter, right, the class charter. And then from there, I would say, hey, these are the non-negotiables. These 6 things, these 5 things, these 7 things, right? As the teacher, it is my job to make sure this is a safe, inclusive place for everybody. Everybody's respected, everybody is valued, right? But what else would you guys like to add to this? In your experience when you're gaming, in your experience playing online, in your experience playing with your friends, what kind of interactions do you have? What kind of experiences have you had? And how should we make sure that, those negative experiences aren't part of this classroom? Because, we want to be able to do this, but everybody has to, play by the rules if this is what we're going to do. And a lot of times when you ask kids about, what they would like to do, number one, they feel heard, which is always important. But number 2 is they're going to give you really sometimes things you've never thought about, right? Because their world is different than the world of adults and stuff like that. But number 2, they're going to lay out things that they always hope to see. And so for me, one rule that always would pop up is I'm going to try my best whether I'm winning or losing. And if you've ever played games, you've ever jumped into a game of Overwatch or something like that, it's not uncommon if your team is losing for somebody on the team to just kind of give up and start goofing around, or somebody to sandbag or just leave the match completely. It's this idea that if we set up this team charter and we set up these classroom norms and give kids a voice, you're ultimately going to do you're going to get better learning outcomes, because it can be difficult to teach in a game-based learning classroom. It does require a teacher to be a little bit, we'll say more involved than you think. And we'll talk about that in a little bit too. But once we understand game-based learning, once we understand the importance of setting the norms and the expectations so kids know the way we play games at home is not how we learn with games in school. The next big thing when you introduce gaming, game-based learning, esports into your classroom is that you clearly define the purpose and the objectives, right? We want to make sure that we understand the way that games can be used and what they're going to do for us. And, just like you would any other lesson or activity, you're going to give it the same consideration, right? And you will find that game-based learning generally falls into, I would say four-ish, kind of different mediums, right? So the first one is a shared experience. And to give you an example, right, there is a wonderful game called This War of Mine. And more I've been seeing it pop up in history classes and other classes where the civilian experience and the toll that war plays, the toll that war takes on folks who are not soldiers, it's a really great game, because it's going to give people the shared experience of what it may be like to come from a war-torn country, what it may be like to be involved in a country at war as a non-military participant, right? Or let's say that you wanted to use competition in esports as a way to help kids grow socially and emotionally and academically, right? One of my favorite activities to do is blindfolded Rocket League. And really any game, right? If you want a great takeaway for your classroom, any game blindfolded is fantastic, because when you pair kids up and one student who's playing the game is blindfolded, right? That other student, his or her teammate, has to focus on communication, has to focus on, being able to convey a lot of information in a very short window of time, using this example of Rocket League. And the person being blindfolded has to be an active listener, has to nod their head or, say, heard or check or whatever the case may be. So that way they're letting the person know who's playing, who's coaching them through, blindfolded Rocket League, that they're, doing their best, or they may need to ask questions to better figure out what's going on, right? But again, when it comes to bringing games and gaming and game-based learning to your classroom, understanding what is the purpose, what do you want students to do, what do you want them to learn, right, is really the first thing when you want to think about when you're starting to plan your lessons. And a shared experience, when you want somebody, when you want the class to have this shared experience, really makes for some great activities, right? Some other examples are games as text. I'm an English teacher by trade, so some of my favorite things to do with games is teach them as art, as text. And so there are some wonderful story-driven games like Firewatch, where the same care and consideration we give to a novel, right, we can give to the game. Or in the case of a game, if you've ever heard of BioShock, a fantastic game, you can actually pair it up with the novel that it is based on, right? So BioShock is an unbelievably fun and interesting game, but it is also based on Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. So perhaps reading the book and then playing the game and comparing and contrasting to the two of them, right, is really something exciting for kids to do, because, maybe at best, sometimes we get to bring in a movie that's related to the books or the content that we're teaching. But a movie is a sit and get experience, where playing games turns kids from consumers, right, to active participants. So to have them work their way through Firewatch, or have them work their way and compare and contrast a game like BioShock, or one of the best teaching experiences I ever had is I had to do an English unit on ethics and morality. And so we played The Walking Dead. Telltale's Walking Dead episode 1 is a fantastic story. And throughout the story, you are challenged to make very, very difficult decisions. And when we talked about ethics and morality, my students, they learned some really kind of neat things that I have not been able to, I guess, get them to understand through other mediums, right? When it came to the Walking Dead series, they very quickly learned that sometimes you have to make a decision, and both of your choices are horrible decisions. And then if you've ever played the game, you know that if you don't make a decision, the story doesn't wait. It makes the decision for you. And so that was really another, thing that I've only ever been able to convey through games to my students, is that not making a decision is actually making a decision, right? So even if you are faced with two horrible choices, if you don't decide, however you want to say it, life or the game is going to decide for you, right? Because at times not making a decision is making a decision. Other things that games could do really well is they can act as a model, right? Gaming is a model. When you want to show something or reinforce something or explain something, games are a fantastic way to do that. And so again, drawing on my English background, an example I have is Gone Home. Gone Home is a fantastic story, a bit of a mystery where you have to figure out, where the character that lived in this house, I don't want to give too many spoilers, where this character that lived in this house, well, she's not there. Where did she go and why, right? And the game Gone Home, besides being a great story, is a fantastic model for what's called transmedia storytelling. And transmedia storytelling is this idea that you can tell stories in unique and exciting ways outside of maybe what people are used to. And so in the game Gone Home, for instance, you start to piece together the puzzle of what happened to this character by all of the things left throughout the house. So there's an answer, there's a message on the answering machine, there's a newspaper article on the refrigerator, there's a diary under the character's pillow, there's a secret compartment that has, a couple, interesting things that relate to the story. But ultimately, you can piece together the story of what happened to this character, not just by somebody telling you, not just by even having a narrator, because the game has very, very limited narration. It's by looking at all these other context clues and all these other ways that we can learn about people, about stories, and we can tell stories in non-traditional ways. And so, that was an English class or an English lesson I always used to kind of end my classes with, because transmedia storytelling, when you talk about the intersection of like digital arts and gaming and all that stuff, transmedia storytelling is fantastic, right? And to really drive home what transmedia storytelling was, Gone Home was a great model to do that, right? Or if you teach science, right? One of the coolest lessons I've seen is I had a biology teacher who used Pokemon to teach classifications. They would put, and I'm going to get this wrong, so I apologize, science teachers, but they would put these Pokemon into different kingdoms and then phylums and then classifications and, what Pokemon are fire-based and what Pokemon are water-based, but what then, water-based Pokemon that are on 2 legs or 4 legs. And we've seen this done obviously in the animal kingdom, but when you talk about using games and gaming as a tool for engagement, the ability to bring in something that they care about, right? Something like Pokemon. I've also seen this done with Super Smash Bros. If you're familiar with the archetypes in Super Smash Bros, you have brawlers, you have distance fighters. You can use Pokemon, you can use Super Smash Bros to teach something like classification in science and stuff like that. And then really, this is the big one. And this is the one that really started gaming and game-based learning in the classroom for me, was games to show what you've learned. And what's interesting is a way to bring game-based learning into any classroom is very simply look at gaming as an end product, as an end project, as a project-based opportunity for students to show what you've learned. I remember when I finished a unit on Shakespeare. And I said, hey, we learned about Shakespeare, we learned about Romeo and Juliet. How would you like to show me what you learned? And a lot of times, kids, well, and I should say I would always make part of that project the inability to do slideshows because they're super boring. So what I would do is say, hey, anything besides a slideshow, how do you want to show me what you learned? And it was cool. Like I had kids make all kinds of stuff, but often they would go back to games. And I remember how I learned about Minecraft was I had a student who said, can I, make the Globe Theater in Minecraft and have my favorite scene from Romeo and Juliet on the stage? And I had no idea what Minecraft was, but I said yes. And about a week later, the kid came in and put on this really cool presentation where he walked through the Globe Theater and the groundlings, and on the stage was Romeo and Juliet, the big climactic scene where, Juliet had died and everything like that. But it's also like tools like Scratch or Make Code Arcade. Students have made games for me. And what's great too is it doesn't always have to be digital games. A lot of times board games and card games were really exciting to kids. But really, if you're looking for a way to get started with game-based learning and you want to integrate it to any classroom, simply saying, hey, how would you like to show me what you've learned using Minecraft, using this game? That's a great way to get it into any classroom. And as you're thinking about, the purpose of gaming and what you want to do and what you want students to learn, the other thing that I encourage you, because remember, there's a few ways to do this, what I would say is incorrectly. Don't grade the gameplay. Don't grade their ability to do well in the game. Don't grade their ability to come in first place. What you want to grade, like everything else, is the learning. Did they capture, did they capture what they have learned? And did they show it to you or create something or complete the assignment in a way that shows that they have, completed the objectives and mastered the learning, right? And so that's a big piece, right? When it comes to bringing game-based learning into your classroom. Number 3, make sure you clearly define the purpose and the objectives. And I would tell you these are the main buckets, right, that game-based learning fits into. And number 4 is really simple. Number 4 is one that when I go out and do some professional development, I have to remind educators all the time is in a game-based learning classroom, you are still the teacher. And if you're still the teacher, that means gaming, the game, the activity, it's just like anything else. If you are teaching in a game-based learning classroom, if you are teaching with Gameplan, you're bringing in all these exciting lessons, you are still the teacher. The game is just another activity. So when you come into, my English classroom and we're not doing gaming, right? It looks exactly like the classrooms that you come into when we are. I still have my do nows. I still have my whole class instruction. I still spend a bulk of my time, right, having my kids do independent learning, and I work my way around the classroom in a small group. If I see something cool, right, I usually throw it up on the projector and we talk about it. And then before kids leave, we share out and we have an exit ticket. Whether I have a game at the center of the class that day or not, it still looks the same. And so don't think that you have to change everything about how you teach because you're going to introduce gaming and esports and all that stuff. It's just another activity, but it's an activity that's going to drive excitement and it's going to drive engagement for your kids because it's, reaching them where they are. And so, don't forget, it's still good teaching. Good teaching is good teaching is good teaching. And then the last piece I wanted to share with you is using blended learning to support game-based learning. And one of the early struggles I had when being a teacher was, how do I manage the kids all playing a game like Gone Home? How do I manage a bunch of kids doing blindfolded Rocket League? How do I manage a bunch of kids who are building something in Minecraft Education Edition? How do I manage, really anything where, you know how it is. Some kids are going to move faster. Some kids are going to need more support. And you as the teacher, your job is to be able to support everybody. And so for me, one of the major ways to do that, right, was blended learning. And if you're not familiar with blended learning, that is when you have in-person classes, right, classroom-based synchronous learning that incorporates elements of online learning, right, and technology-enhanced pedagogies. The teacher takes on more of a support role in the classroom as students move through content at their own pace. And what I have loved about blended learning since I made the switch again about the same time I started bringing games into my classroom is, number one, it saves me a lot of time. It reduces the amount of classroom management issues because students are actively participating and teaching and working through lessons. Because I had found my classroom management issues usually came from kids who were either, I was moving too slow or I was moving too fast, and that caused kids to get frustrated, right? But blended learning allows them to move really kind of at their own pace. And so for me, that helped with a lot of classroom management issues, on top of, instead of sitting and listening to me like you guys are now, right? It was more around those students moving at their own pace through the content that I had already made. And then my job became supporting teachers. Let me try that again. It became supporting students as they were working through their different lessons, right? And really making kids active participants in their learning is what kids need at this point. Because don't forget, is when they get bored, they have video games. When they get bored, they can reach into their pocket and grab their cell phone. And it's going to be really hard for us as educators to compete, right, with what's in their pocket, to compete with, the games. And they're only going to get more exciting and more engaging. So why don't we use them and then use blended learning to make it easy, right? And that's part of what makes Gameplan such a powerful LMS, is we have designed lessons to be taught not just in a blended learning environment, right, but giving you the tools to be able to use the lessons, to use the platform to really make your lives easier. And so when it comes to using Gameplan and game-based learning, it really is a match made in heaven, right? These engaging lessons, they keep students interested throughout the course because we always start with a 5-minute hook, a 5-minute video that excites them about what they're going to learn. There's some pages of visual information, interactive activities. There's a drill for students, which usually can be, if it's not just more traditional learning, it's actively using the games. And then the students end again, right, with that exit ticket, that quiz, that reflection. So the platform itself, right, is designed to not just support game-based learning, but it's also designed to support blended learning. And when it comes to, right, using the platform, we still want to understand that as a teacher, right, there's still best practices around, right, working your way throughout the classroom. And so I always get asked, well, if I'm in a blended learning classroom, what do I do? Well, number one, right, circulate. My goal when I teach in a blended learning classroom is to make sure I get to visit every single kid, every single class. If I'm doing 45 minutes, an hour of direct instruction, I can't do that. But when I do 5-10 minutes of direct instruction, right, I show them the lesson on Gameplan that they're going to be working on. And then I say, okay, work your way through the lesson. I'm going to be around to help you out. Well, what am I doing? I'm reinforcing and reminding them of the direct instructions that I gave them, what they should be doing. I'm checking for understanding. I say, hey, Joey, show me what you've been working on, or tell me, why you did that, or why did you write that? I love to challenge my high flyers to go deeper. You'll find sometimes kids are a little bit faster than their peers. Those are the kids that I'll say, oh, that was really cool that you did that. Did you consider this? Or what if you did that? Right? So giving them that feedback and challenging them to go deeper. I always love to showcase excellence, right? In my classes, anytime somebody discovers something, anytime somebody does something cool, even if they have, are struggling, I will, show it to the class and get feedback, and we'll see if we can workshop or, ask the student about what they created and why they chose to make those decisions, right? So think about if you are, using Minecraft Education Edition in the class. And it is, the challenge is to show me what you have learned. Well, if somebody built something really cool as I'm making my way around, and say, hey guys, check out what Pia did. And I'm going to put it up and I'm say, Pia, can you talk a little bit about, why you made these design decisions and tell me about how this shows me, the teacher, that you understood the learning objective. Like, why did you make those decisions? So there's some really great opportunities as an educator in a blended learning classroom to use games to really engage kids and make them dive deeper into their own learning, while also giving them the ability, right, to get what most kids needs, and that small group, if not one-on-one time with the teacher. And then there's a lot of times where some kids, as they start to wrap up, they're far ahead, and that's a great time to build relationships. Because I'm not talking for 45 minutes to the entire class, I can ask, William, hey, how was the soccer game? Or, what do you do after school? Or what games are you playing? Because we know, like Reedy Pearson said, is kids don't learn from teachers they don't like. So blended learning, game-based learning are also ways that you can use, gaming to build relationships. And, when it comes to using Gameplan, one of my favorite features on Gameplan, if you guys have not seen it, let me go ahead and see if I can do a quick screen share for you. Let's see. So I jumped into the game plan classroom here live. And one of my favorite things to do is to show off, is to always make sure I check on the progress tab in Game Plan. And so you'll see number one, when you jump into Game Plan, it looks a lot like Google Classroom. I always like to describe Game Plan as Google Classroom on steroids, because on one hand, we're an LMS. So everything Google Classroom could do, Game Plan could do, and do it better. But number two is when we jump into one of the courses, right? So let's say that I'm doing something in my game design class, which I have taught before, especially as an English teacher, right? It's always been cool to teach English through video game design. Let's say that I am doing something in my game design class. And a lot of times when it comes to blended learning, I would schedule my lessons usually for the week, right? When I got really confident in what I was teaching, I would schedule my lessons for the week. So that way kids knew, what was due and when, and they knew that they had 5 days to do it. On Monday, we would, take a look at what was due during the week. And then on Friday, we would kind of see how far they progressed. But, right, when it came to blended learning, my ability so let's take like this activity here. Number one, just by mousing over, if you guys have Game Plan, you will see how many kids started or did not start a lesson. And then you'll also see, where they are in their progress, right? So if I click on this lesson that I've assigned them, right, beyond seeing the overview of the objectives, the teaching instructions, all the different activities and different assignments that I've given them with inside this lesson, one of my favorite tabs is to click on progress. And this gives a breakdown of where everybody is, right, throughout a lesson. And this is really neat because if I'm in a blended learning classroom and I'm using Game Plan, right, I can look at this before the kids come to class and I can say, okay, who has not started? Oh, I got to go talk to Carl. I got to talk to William. I got to talk to Eric, right? And those are the kids that are going to visit first because I know, right, by mousing over, I can see who completed it, right? And this could, Boas Backstrom is in progress. He's working on it. But basically, you get a snapshot, right? And now, if we back it up to be the, if we're thinking about the week, right? Game Plan's lessons are meant to be 45 minutes, give or take a few minutes. I know that if it's Wednesday and I still have kids who haven't started Tuesday's lesson, like those are kids I need to go and I need to deal with first. And so what's neat is, again, in a blended learning classroom, because I know that direct instruction is mostly going to be limited to 5, maybe 10 minutes, and students are going to be doing a majority of the work independently, this is a great tool for me to make sure that I'm prepared to talk to my kids when class starts, right? And again, something as simple as taking the lessons once you have assigned them via Game Plan and dropping in and looking at the progress. Again, you'll have an idea of what kids you should visit first because they're struggling, and then what kids you can save toward the end, and maybe you spend some time just building relationships or giving them an anchor activity or a challenging project because they are so far ahead or they are where they should be. And so that's something that I wanted to make sure that folks knew is, when I teach on Game Plan, that progress feature is something that I'm always looking at before class starts, before the kids walk in, so I can see where they are. And what I learned sometimes is I scheduled too much work, or sometimes I scheduled that, the lesson was so rigorous that I need to give them more time, right? And so to me, right, using blended learning to introduce, gaming and game-based learning to the classroom is really great. And then Game Plan being an LMS designed for, these experiential game-based learning, project-based, hands-on, let's go deeper and let's do some cool stuff. I mean, Game Plan's got a whole bunch of tools that make all of this way easier beyond the curriculum, right, and having a lot of this curriculum ready to go. A lot of the tools like being able to check on students' progress give you the ability as the teacher to go into a classroom armed with the knowledge you need to be the best teacher you can be. So instead of guessing where kids are, you can literally see what they've completed and what needs to be done. And so I see Tim in the chat saying, I like the ability to check progress, getting more used to using it now. Absolutely. I get in the habit of, the night before or the class before, if you have prep or something like that or on lunch, load it up and you can get especially because if you saw it was heat mapped, you had the blue, the yellow, the green, and the gray. You get a real quick visual picture of like how the whole class is doing. And then you can mouse over and drill down and see specifically, who is struggling, where they're struggling, and one thing that, things that you can help them out with. And Tim goes on to say, one problem I'm having is making sure students are actually going through the assignments and not just rushing through to finish. And a lot of times, Tim, that is number one when it comes back to that class charter that we talked about, earlier. Is as a teacher, I've never had higher standards than when I've used games and gaming in the classroom. My kids know that gaming is a privilege. It is not a right. My kids know that, if they're not going to do their best work when it comes to using games in the classroom, listen, they could go back and use the worksheets. They could go back and, just give up, I guess, the privilege of using games. But I have found that when I have high expectations, especially when I've set the tone about how we use games in the classroom, when I use blended learning to circulate and I'm constantly looking over kids' shoulders. And, Tim, what was always helpful for me is if I felt the kids were not doing their best work, I would let them know before they turned it in. I'd say, hey, Tim, tell me what you got. And, let me see what you're working on. And let me read that. And hey, Tim, I know that you could probably get a little deeper. I know that you could probably do a little bit more. Why don't you spend a little bit extra time on it, Tim, to really see what you can do? Because I bet you can even do better. And so when you have, hold kids accountable, you hold them to high expectations, that's really where you're going to get kids to dive deep and, having them know, the way they play games at home is not the way they learn with games in school. And so that would be my suggestion, Tim, is the same way you would hold kids accountable for rushing through work is the same way that you want to hold them accountable, right, when you're using Gameplan. And so the other thing that I could potentially think of, too, when it comes to, having kids rush through, what are they rushing through to do? Right. And so one of the things I said at the top of the webinar was I never used gaming as a reward, meaning like, oh, if you finish this work quickly, you can go play Smash Bros over there, or you can go play Fortnite, or you can go do something like that. Because that is exactly what would happen to me is they would just fly through their work. The work was never very good because they just wanted to hurry up and play video games. So I would also consider, right, Tim, and you feel free to email me and we can dive in deeper, but what are they rushing to do? If they're rushing to sit around, right, one of my favorite things is I used to have a whole kind of like folder of anchor activities. Oh, when you're done, right, Mr. Aviles has high expectations. You're not just sitting here doing nothing, right? So I used to have a folder and I moved the entire folder onto Gameplan because I can assign things via Gameplan to students. If a kid was done early and they rushed through their work, and I gave them the opportunity to go back and fix it, and they didn't. Number one, they were held accountable because their grade wasn't that great. But number two, right, I would just assign them another assignment. So they stopped rushing through the work because number one, they knew they were going to get a poor grade if they rushed through the work. But number two, they knew there was just more work, right? My kids were never allowed to just do nothing. And so for me, having a whole series of, extra assignments, I call them anchor activities. Because a lot of times when you have a kid who is done early, whether they rushed or they're just exceptionally bright, hey, we're going to give you something else to do. And it's usually an extension activity around what they had already been learning. So beyond Tim, as we start to wind down here, I'll turn it over to the chat if anybody else has any questions. But I think, Tim, that was really valuable. Just because I feel like teachers, especially if they're new to game-based learning, that's a common problem. When you introduce content and engagement around video games, sometimes, kids don't understand that they work just as hard or not harder. And so Tim says, oh, I like that. That really helps. Thank you. Really makes me think about how I could rework. I've been running the class. Absolutely. And like I said, too, is Gameplan at the end of the day is an unbelievable platform. It's got great content. It's going to make your life as as a teacher easier. However, teaching with Gameplan in a game-based learning class, in a blended learning environment, it's still teaching. It's still best teaching practices, and you still have to have, accountability, and you still have to have ways to, deal with the wonders that are our students. And so as we wrap it up, if you guys watching the webinar are not Gameplan users, I remind you that Gameplan is a digital learning platform for game-based learning. We have the ability to use esports, AAA titles like Rocket League and Super Smash Bros. To drive social emotional growth of students. We have lessons around data literacy. And then we also have complete courses. We have complete courses on cybersecurity. We have complete courses on interactive media production. We have courses on using and learning Unreal Engine, because one thing you'll notice is kids who love to play video games oftentimes like to make video games. And so if that's something that you want to introduce, we have you covered. Right now I would say the core class that everything is built around is our esports introduction course, or for our middle schoolers, exploring esports and gaming. And those serve as electives to really give not just hands-on experience in some lucrative STEM fields like video game design, but it also is going to introduce kids to the different careers in and around gaming. Because what you'll see too is kids who love gaming, which really, if you look at the numbers, is most of them, there is a subset of that group who has a high interest in working in and around the gaming or esports arena. So, if you have not got a chance, if you are not a Gameplan subscriber, you're not a customer, definitely hit me up. I would love to demo the platform for you, show what game-based learning looks like on Gameplan if you want to bring this to your classroom. We also do tons of professional development. If you are a Gameplan customer and you have always dreamed of having your very own Chris Aviles webinar or in-person visit, I would love to come out and support you, because my passion at the end of the day really is using games and gaming and blended learning and all these really kind of great teaching practices for better learning outcomes for students. So whether it's you're trying to start an after-school esports program, you're using Gameplan content, if you're a district administrator who wants to bring us in to do a complete district makeover and revitalize your STEM and tech electives and start it off with esports and build it into 3 core sequences that end in industry credentials, I mean, that's my passion. So I would love to work with anybody out there who is watching. So whether it's, getting to know the platform and the curriculum of Gameplan, or understanding the professional development opportunities so I can bring some of this passion to you and your school and students and teachers, I would love to do so. Again, my name is Chris Aviles. I am the product evangelist for Gameplan, and that is my email. Whenever you guys have some time, shoot me an email, and I would love to connect, love to talk, and love to share. So thank you all for coming. And I will see you in the next one. Take care.